We have a special treat for you for our closing keynote. It's going to be a one-on-one interview with Isabelle Falque Pierrotin. She is the the president of the Comité national de l'informatique et de liberté, and she's also the chair of the Article 29 working group. As you all know, it's the watchdog, the independent watchdog set up by the EU to counsel on data matters. So I want to invite her up, and it's great to have you.
Can I sit here?
Please. Please.
Oops.
So this morning we had a spirited discussion on a lot of the things that you think a lot about, but I want to start with what at least seemed to me like the newsiest thing that came out of it. Talking with Giovanni Buttarelli and someone at the Commission on the Privacy Shield, we got the very strong impression that further delays are at hand, that this is something that may be pushed into the autumn. How is that a bad thing? And does that what does that mean from your point of view?
I think it's a weird thing because we are in a situation since October of illegality, of legal uncertainty for the industry, for the end users. So I think the sooner the new shield is concluded, the better for everyone. And I don't see why 2 months would make a difference, you know. I mean, the European negotiators and the American negotiators, they have all the elements to come to a decision. Then they will be responsible for this decision. In other words, if this decision is weak legally, it will have consequences. But I think we should collectively close the present legal uncertainty very quickly.
Do you still see fundamental disagreements between Europe and the US?
Well, I don't. We're not part. The Working Party 29 is not part of the negotiation.
Right.
Neither the EDPS. So I don't have the latest developments of these negotiators. What I can say is that we have expressed concerns on the first Privacy Shield project. And these concerns were on the commercial side, and specifically on the onward transfers, but it was also on the public security sides. So that's all of what I know now. So we will see if the final decision answer to these concerns.
But do you think that, I mean, isn't this Privacy Shield, do you really believe that it's anything more than a Band-Aid, considering that the odds of it being struck down by the European Court of Justice before you even get to the first, assuming you get assigned by at a certain point, that it will be struck down by the ECJ before you even get to the first annual review?
What do you mean? I mean, I don't understand the
question. Is it anything more than a sort of temporary Band-Aid and something which is not going to, because it is, it likely may not survive?
Well, the problem is that the ruling, the ECJ ruling, is not just an isolated ruling, you see. It's a series of rulings in which the European Supreme Court has said data from European citizens must be taken seriously and must be protected on our soil, of course, but also when the data is transferred to wherever part of the world and if it is accessed by whoever in the world. So the guarantees that has asked the court, the European Supreme Court, are quite demanding. So the question now is, what is going to make and to decide the Commission? What kind of legal risk it is going to take? I think it's quite possible to answer to the guarantees demanded by the court. It is possible. We have suggested, in our opinion, several paths of improvements of the decision. So, you know, we'll see.
Is there, I mean, as you probably know and have heard yourself, there's a criticism that the privacy watchdogs in the continent are at some level anti-business, that these the issues that you're raising is one of the reasons why you've had less innovation on the continent, than you might have less connectivity. Is there a kind of Luddite strain to the opposing side?
Well, this is a very, I would say, current message that we heard, because innovation is the sort of new motto anywhere in the world. But I think it's to oppose privacy and innovation, I would think, is a bit short-sighted, because innovation now is built on data, more and more on data. And we've seen, and I've been here sitting in the back in the last 2 hours, and I've heard during these 2 hours people expressing a kind of erosion of confidence around the data. So if we want innovation to be robust, to be sustainable, we have to give guarantees on the way data is treated by this innovation. So I think data protection clearly is an investment. It's not a cost, it's an investment. It's on the medium term and long term a good payback for innovation.
Because if you want people to share, for example, their health data, they should not be overly concerned about this being hacked or being used for bad reason, but seeing the positive sides. Who should be leading that sort of psychological, it's almost like a PR job, right? Isn't it?
I would say all of us, the industry representatives that are in the room, the data authorities, of course, because in fact we are in the same boat with the different roles, but we are in the same boat. We all want that the digital environment has growth, and so there has to be a balance between the various objectives of each of us, you see. Data protection on one hand, innovation on the other hand. So everybody must be a PR of that. You know, it's not only industry representatives, and it's...
What more could industry do?
I think industry must realize that data is an asset, and as an asset, it has to be treated seriously. It's not just a cost, you know, sort of a raw material that you use and you do whatever out of it. It's an asset, so you have to maintain this asset and make it live on the long run. And if it is an asset, you have to give guarantees to the people that are behind the data, and it's the individuals, you and me.
Do you and the other data protection authorities across the EU have the resources you need to enforce this data protection directive?
Well, I think, of course, there are differences between these DPA all around Europe, and you have very strong DPA, very old ones, and others that are less powerful. But the objective of the GDPR is to put all the DPA at the same level and to provide them with the same levels of powers, resources, possibly. So I think the question of resources is not the key one. I think the key one is really to understand what will be the role of these institutions in the long run, you see, and how they will adapt to the new situation, to the new digital environment.
Is 2 years enough time to implement?
Well, I think 2 years is the time we need. And when I say we, I mean collectively, we DPA, we industry representatives, we end users, to go from the text itself, which is a good text, but it's a sort of a legal cathedral, you know. We have to come from the legal cathedrals to an operational legal framework. So we need 2 years to clarify all the legal requirements, to provide the industry with clear requirements, with referentials, with, to operationalize the text. And it's exactly, this is our duty as DPA. And we've started to do this in designing a first action plan for 2016, setting the priorities, the first priorities that we have identified in the text. And for instance, we have identified 4 first priorities: DPO, because
What's that, DPO?
the DPO, Data Protection Officer,
Okay.
is the sort of chef d'orchestre. He's the man that will be in charge of the compliance efforts of any data controllers. So this is really the key guy. So who will it be? What kind of resources will he have? I mean, all the environment of the DPO is absolutely crucial for the compliance efforts of the data controllers to be efficient. So DPO, data portability. Why data portability? Because it's a new right, and it's a very important right because it rebalances the relationship and the relation of powers between the individuals and the industry. So we want data portability right to be really effective. So this is a second priority. Third priority is the risk. How do we manage for the risk? What is a risky treatment? PIA, what is PIA, etc. And the
What is PIA? I'm
PIA,
afraid that I'm a
privacy,
Luddite of a source myself. So,
you're totally right. I should be more transparent on all these awful words. PIA, privacy impact assessment.
Okay.
So it's a sort of security audit for the most sensible, sensitive treatments that is required by the regulation. And the last priority is certification. Why certification? Because we believe that the compliance should be also played by new actors, bringing their efforts to the DPA and helping and cooperating through codes of conduct, certification process with the DPA. So certification is a new area in which I would say regulation should innovate. So these are the four first subjects that we believe are priorities. And when I say priorities, I mean 4 subjects for which we're going to issue guidelines very quickly. And to do this, we, of course, don't want to work by ourselves, because we strongly believe in co-regulation, you know. The regulators are not independent from the ground, so we need to work with you, with industry representative, with representative from the civil society, in order to get their input on these first 4 subjects, and we need to have them tell us what are your questions, what are the clarifications you want. And it's why we are organizing at the end of July, on the 26th of July, we are organizing a Fab Lab, which is a sort of co-construction on these priorities in order to get everyone to tell us what are the key issues, you know. And so after
Fab Lab is or does it stand for something?
Fab Lab. You must know what is a Fab Lab. You should know as political representative. Fab Lab.
I always admit ignorance, and I do in this case.
No. I'm just kidding you. Fab Lab is a very interesting process. Fab Lab means to share in an innovative mood the co-construction of something. So it can be a device, it can be a good, and it can also be regulation, we believe. So we have launched this idea to have this Fab Lab on the 26th of July in Brussels. And
does it stand for Fabulous Laboratory, or does it? Is there a or just?
Or
is that actually an acronym for some?
No, it's Fabrication Laboratory.
Okay, Fabrication Laboratory, yes. Okay. Fabulous would be good too, I think.
But it can be fabulous.
Yeah, right. Okay. Please do jump in with questions. We do want to have this like a fireside chat in
Let me
environment
just
here. So.
finish with this Fab Lab. I think it's
I was so enamored of my.
I think it's quite interesting to say that once we're finished with the first priorities, we will ask you what are the other questions, the other subjects that you believe as the priority, and we will repeat twice, 3 times, 4 times this Fab Labs process until we're finished with the clarification of the GDPR. So we hope that through this process we will be ready within 2 years.
Right.
You see?
Terrific. I do want to remind you to please raise your hand and jump in. We're lucky to have Isabelle here to answer your questions. There used to be, this kind of joke about France, or a French joke that it works in practice but doesn't work in theory. And there's a criticism of some of the approach to privacy protections that in America, actually in practice, implements it better than Europe, which is so focused on getting what's on the books right. Is there anything to this criticism?
You've noticed that I'm not speaking here today as a French representative.
I was not even that. That's not why I thought I'd land.
No, it's true that in Europe, usually we are more on the concepts than our American friends. That American friends are more into the operationalization of any legal system. So I think what tries the GDPR is to borrow from the Anglo-Saxon approach these operational issues and tools. And when we introduce into the GDPR the accountability, it is exactly this. We are hybriding, we are mixing two legal inspiration in order to produce something that should be efficient. Because what is accountability? Accountability, it is the idea in the GDPR is to say to the industry representatives, to the data controllers, you have to be responsible for the data protection, and you have to show how you commit to this responsibility through concrete tools. So I think the European legal framework has integrated, I would say, operational tools from the Anglo-Saxon approach. And I think it's very positive to have this hybridation of legal influence, you see. And I hope it's going to work and it's going to be efficient.
What's come out of all these tussles over privacy across the Atlantic over the last couple of years?
Well, I think
either positive or negative. I don't know.
I think maybe the opposition has been also a little bit communicated, but over-communicated. You know, the idea is not to struggle against the United States or whoever. It's not the point, really. The point is, and it's a much simpler point, it is to say if very large international companies, being American or being Chinese, whatever, if they come to Europe, if they come on our territory to collect data from European citizens, the least we can ask is that they respect European laws. So this is as simple as this. You know, there has been a debate about whether Europe was exporting in a sort of imperialistic way its legal system. But it's really not the case, because it's not a situation in which Europe goes to Asia or goes to United States and apply its own law to these countries. It is just to say that if you are operating in Europe, offering goods or services to European citizens, and therefore being subjected to European laws, according to these laws, you have certain guarantees to offer, to respect. You see? So I think the debate has to be a bit, I would say, rebalanced.
Do you think that we've come closer together?
I think we have a learning curve, obviously, to know each other more than we did, and to limit the opposition to what is needed, because there are still opposition, you know, there are still differences of approach on certain subjects, and what is the point? We're not going to have to be aligned on all the subjects worldwide. It's not, I would say, it's totally unrealistic. But I think we talk together very, you know, more closely than we used to, and I think it's good.
Good. So last, I think, December, we at Politico we do an annual magazine called the Politico 28, where we choose 28 figures from 28 of the EU member countries who are stirring, shaking, and Europe. And I think we chose you as number 6 on the list. It was a highly scientific ranking, so I never did congratulate you, by the way. But I remember in that feature we asked some people who were chosen to pick an advertising slogan for Europe, and yours was "Yes, we can." Borrowing from President Obama. Would that be your choice today, since a lot's happened in those 6 months, including some tragic events in Paris and in Brussels, a potentially very disturbing event later this week in the UK. What would your slogan be today?
It would be exactly the same, because I think we are in a situation in which Europe has to show that it's possible to exist, that it's possible to have a strong identity, and at the same time being into the modernity, you know, being into the 21st century. So I would say, yes, we can. It is possible to build this Europe at one condition, just to wish it.
Where do you see that coming from? Who is going to make this happen?
Well, I think probably this is something that goes much beyond the data protection. I think that there is a need from the citizens to change, I would say, our governance model, because in the recent years we've seen that the citizen wanted a Europe that should be closer to them and should be more in line with their direct worries and not less technocratic. And this is something we want to build in the privacy protection, because, for instance, we're trying to build in the privacy protection, I think, an example of a new European institution, because we're trying to build this EDPB. Probably you haven't heard of what is the EDPB. The EDPB will be the European Data Protection Board, and the EDPB will replace the present Working Party 29. And what is interesting to know about the EDPB is the type of European institution that we're going to build. It's not going to be an institution centralized and very robust in Brussels. It will be a governance model with different layers. The first layers of this governance model would be the national authorities, the CNIL in France, the ICO in the UK, the Germany Data Protection Authority. These authorities will be strong and they will be very active on their soil. Once they have something in common, they will, second layer, cooperate between them, so bilateral cooperation. Third layer, this is the European layer, the EDPB, only in charge of resolving the conflict and bringing common tools to the network of the DPA. And I think it's an attempt, it's an effort to build a European governance model that is a bit different to the one we've known until now. Again, centralized and everything in Brussels. This model is more decentralized, distributed in all the countries, but also integrated in Brussels when it's needed. And I believe in this example, it is a possibility to answer to the need of the citizens to have something more closer to them, but at the same time, integrated and at the European level also.
What could Brussels do more to bring, I guess, pardon the cliche, the continent into the digital future?
I think one of the difficulties that we have on the digital future, and I guess it is in Brussels like it is in the national countries, is on the various subjects that we have to deal with, is, again, to change the governance model. Because when you have a subject that is transversal, that is interesting various number of people. You need, if you want to have an action plan, if you want to have a real policy that is effective, you need to have all these people around the table. For instance, when you want to build an ambition or a policy for e-medicine, you see, you need to have doctors, but you need to have researchers, you need to have the telco operators and all the software producers, and all these people need to cooperate for the same ambition and using their own and specific tools. The question, I think, that has Brussels, and as we have in our countries, is to be able to build subject by subject this type of governance.
Great. I see we have a question a little bit here on the right side, or my right side. Back. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Kim Smouter from SMR. I had a question around the adequacy. So adequacy will survive in the new GDPR. And I'm very curious to hear, is there going to be a European effort to try to get as many countries to adopt that as a way to kind of get around this privacy shield problem that we have with the US? And are you seeing any new countries which are kind of rushing to be the first to adopt adequacy? So are we seeing the European model becoming the global model versus, except the US perhaps?
I think it's entirely true, and it's why the shield is so important, because it's the possibility for Europe and the United States to build commonly a European standard on adequacy. So it's depending on that level of standard, you know, it will have consequences on other countries. I can see that in the Asian Pacific zone, there are people very interested by the European efforts. We have had contact with the Korean people, even the Chinese people are looking to Europe as a very interesting part of the world in terms of privacy. And I think it's possible that, you know, they may be interested by the adequacy démarche.
There's a question here on the left.
Hi, Isabelle. My name is Chris Blay. I'm a reporter at Politico. It might be slightly out of your remit, but I thought I'd chance my arm anyway. What is your view on how possibly the Commission will look to regulate things like artificial intelligence and augmented reality, things which aren't necessarily here today, but in the next few years, maybe half a decade, will be quite common?
I think probably the first level of regulation is to try to understand what's going on in artificial intelligence. And in various countries, there are already teams and researchers that are working on that. And so I think the Commission has to probably get a grip on all these first reflections. Then maybe there will be time for regulation, but it's much too early, I would say.
Question in the back.
I'm Timea Balog, and my question is about the legitimate interest of the data controller. As one of the legal bases in the present directive, this is the legal basis among others. And the Article 29 working group has an opinion in that what can be considered as legitimate interest. Is there going to be any change in it in the new regulation? I'm concretely thinking of the processing of data for scientific or historical research. Thank you.
I think probably once the work of clarification of the GDPR has been completed by the Working Party 29, there will come a time in which we may or may not, depending on the conclusions, will review our former opinions, you see. So it's probably one of the opinions that will be one of the first of the list, but it's a bit too early to answer definitively to your question. And speaking of the purpose of research, what is interesting is that in the GDPR, there is some flexibility that is brought for research in the GDPR because it is considered as a purpose that is compatible. And so it's a priori compatible. So it's a way the GDPR has tried to stick to the purpose principle, but also to lift up a little bit the lid in order to allow the researchers to use the data for new purposes, you see.
If I may ask a question about France. Obviously, you're the you're in CNIL. Since the after the Paris attacks in November, the government invoked emergency laws. They've been on the books since then. I assume there's more surveillance going on than was going on before. How is France balancing privacy and security, and have civil liberties in France been vitiated, weakened over the last 7 months?
Well, I think the balance between security and privacy is always very delicate. And nobody, of course, could be against the security issue. But what we say is, and what the CNIL, for instance, in France has said, is that security, it's like innovation. If we want to build a security that is robust, it needs to be built on the acceptance somehow of the citizens. And one of the conditions of this acceptance is the way the data are treated. So once you raise the security issue, at the same time you must raise the guarantees that you are providing to the individuals. And so this is the balance that the CNIL in France has studied for when the government wanted to pass a new law for the intelligence services. And so we have consulted, we have advised, as any other DPA, we have advised our government on the law, and we have been, I would say, partially heard, because on one hand we've asked several things that have been accepted. On the other hand, we have asked, for instance, that the new files, the files of the intelligence services, newly, I would say, fed by the new tools allowed to the intelligence services, that these files would be controlled by the DPA, by the CNIL, and this has not been accepted by our government, you see. And so as DPA, I could say we have not been totally efficient.
But you mean new files, police files on
intelligence services files, yes.
Is that common practice for a government to allow a independent authority such as yours to?
Well, 2 years ago, we have organized in Paris a big conference at the UNESCO, and it was after the Snowden revelations. And after this big UNESCO meeting, we issued, Working Party 29, we issued a sort of memorandum. And so it was a common memorandum shared by all the DPA of Europe. And in this memorandum, it was said that we believed as DPA that files from intelligence services should be, that DPA should have a role in the control of the files of intelligence services, a role. It was not specific because, of course, it depended on national law. You know, in certain countries, these files are controlled by the parliament. In some others, they are controlled by independent authorities. And in some countries also, it's the DPA that play a role, for instance, in Italy. But it was important that all the DPA, from all over the Europe, and with very different, I would say, political and legal tradition, they all agreed on the fact that DPA should have a foot in it. Because, of course, the privacy issues are key in this control, you see. And so it's what we said to our government. We said there is an independent authority that has been set precisely to control these intelligence services. We can cooperate with this new authority and have our role as we are controlling regularly the police files or any kind of file. You know, this is something we do very commonly in France. But it has not been accepted, and you know, it's also the political, I would say, responsibility to make a choice.
Right. I mean, as you know, the Minister of Justice resigned, partly in protest over the Hollande government's, I guess the Valls government's policies in relation to the emergency law. But it sounds like you're concerned, but you're not screaming bloody murder.
We have screamed a lot, but I mean,
Okay.
you know, at some point, you know, we have not something else to do, but other subjects to deal with also.
Right. Are there any other questions, please, from the floor for Isabelle? I think. Let me come back just very quickly to the privacy shield. You mentioned that it's more than a band-aid, that the court's going to review it toughly, but what kind of deal could have been struck that would be a more lasting solution? What was the missing element here? Was it lack of flexibility on the U.S. side? Was it lack of imagination from both sides? Is it just the tough political climate we're in right now that makes it actually just very hard to pull this off?
Well, I think on the opinion that we gave on the shield, we identified various concerns on the commercial side and on the public security side. On each of these concerns, there are answers. It's possible to find solutions and to fix it. Whether you want it or not, this is another question. But I mean, on the commercial side, for instance, we said the onward transfers are probably insufficiently framed. In other words, the question is not only to export the data from Europe to the United States, the question is what's going on in the United States and onwards. You know, if the data leaves the United States to Asia or to whatever. And we said there is something probably to fix there, and there are guarantees that are not totally present. You know, there are technical answers to that. On the public security side, we said there is two main questions. First, the bulk collection. There is bulk collection in the way the American authorities access to data from European citizens. In what case? Is it sufficiently framed? What is the importance of this bulk collection? You know, we need to have precise information about that. It's rather not easy, but I mean, you want to provide the information or not. And the second point was the ombudsperson. The ombudsperson is quite an innovation, you know. It's an innovation because it's the first time the American intelligence services accepted not a kind of oversight, because of course they have oversight, but a kind of independent from them oversight, you see. So it is a very positive move. But the problem with this ombudsperson is that it was obviously not, at least in the first privacy shield, it was not, it didn't have real sign of independence in terms of positioning, in terms of means. So what kind of improvements can we have on that very precise question? So it's, I think the negotiators, they have the concerns of the Working Party 29. They know on which precise points these concerns are dealing with, and we will see how what kind of answers they can provide us with.
Would you rather see them delay but get it right, introduce new elements into the deal, or is it just let's get this sucker out the door?
Well, I'm not going to answer this question because it's not the point. You see, I mean, the point is really to fix the situation that has been open since last October. And the point is not for DPA only. The point is for all of us. you know, and I think all these elements are known, and the problem is that when you're dealing with this question of the shield, you're not dealing only with the shield, you're also dealing with the other transfer instruments, because you are de facto weakening also the other transfer instruments, because some people are asking themselves about the legal robustness of the other transfer tools. So it can't last forever, you see?
I think it's a okay, let me just get one question before.
Simon Hania, TomTom. You're raising the topic of the other transfer mechanisms. So wouldn't you agree that most businesses, aside from a few who've been caught, so to speak, in Hamburg, have transferred to one of the other mechanisms? So what's still the point for businesses to have the privacy shield in place, given that they've resolved the other mechanisms? And will these mechanisms, if they aren't upheld to the United States, why would they be still valid to transfer data to India, which clearly is of a lower standard than the US? So aren't we risking, although we don't want it, data localization to Europe because of this?
You're totally right. This question is a systemic crisis open since October. It is. Because there is a connection between the shield and the other transfer tools through the way the American public authorities have access to the data transferred to their soil, whether they are transferred with the shield or with the other instruments. It's why the answers of the American government on the public security side is so important. It is why we are all aware of that as Working Party 29. It is why we've pushed the Commission and the United States to find a deal and and also we have said it's why we have understood that we have opened also a sort of transition period. In October, in our opinion, we said the safe harbor is dead. You can no longer use it. American negotiators and European negotiators have to fix the situation through a new agreement. And third, we've said the other transfer tools can be used until the deal is made, because we were totally aware that we needed to provide the industry with something. And so it's why the transition period can't last so long, because everybody is using the other transfer tools. They have switched to these tools, but the robustness of these tools, I would say, can be questioned.
How about transfers to India, Philippines, all these other countries? So do we trust Indian intelligence services more than the US intelligence services?
It's why I'm telling you that the deal that will be made between the United States and Europe will constitute a kind of standard along which all the countries will have to adjust. Definitely.
There was one last question in the back, and
sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
My name is Nico van Eyck, Institute for Information Law. Several times the topic of independent oversight was addressed, and the GDPR reconfirms the importance of independent oversight and again confirms the criteria that have to be applied as far as the regulators are concerned. However, I've always been puzzled by the fact that when it comes to the new successor of Article 29, but this is not different, I have to admit, with similar bodies like BEREC, that the European Commission has the full right to participate in all activities and in all meetings of the assembly of independent regulators. And I've tried to find information about this, but it seems a kind of automatic thing. However, I can imagine that for independent regulators, it becomes very difficult if they have to meet together and they have the obligation every time to have the executive being part of that. I could not imagine that the French government could claim that they could be attending all the meetings of the CNIL. What are your thoughts about that?
I thank you for your question and for your remark, because it is a key subject in the future, is really to build this EDPB as an independent institution and as an independent network. And we can see that obviously there are, I would say, not reluctance, but in French you would say frottement for that, because it's the emerging of a community, independent community of privacy regulators. And it's not entirely into the genes, I would say, of the Commission. But it's definitely what we need if we want this community really to work and be active in the future. So the Working Party 29 has said that we would privilege, we would favor an independent and autonomous secretariat. This is the first choice. And the second choice, which is the one that has been favored by the GDPR, it is a secretariat provided by the present EDPS. And so we will have this solution. So it is a secretariat brought by somebody else.
That's a terrific segue to the next stage of this event, which is will involve drinks. Isabelle, thank you so much
Thank you.
for your
Thank you.
for being here with us, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.